ยินดีต้อนรับท่านผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านที่รับชมผ่านระบบวิทยุทางไกลแอปพลิเคชัน WebEx เข้าสู่รายการ Local Reach เชื่อมลึกถึงภูมิภาคประจำเดือนมิถุนายน 2566 ครับและผมชัยวัฒน์ หาญพงศ์เศรษฐกรชำนาญการสังกัดกองนโยบายเศรษฐกิจมหาภาคสำนักงานเศรษฐกิจการคลังกระทรวงการคลังได้รับเกียรติเป็นผู้ดำเนินรายการในวันนี้ครับ Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Having joined the online meeting via the WebEx application, it is a great honor to welcome all of you to the interview program called Local List for June 2023. And me, Chaiwat Haipthapong, economist professional level from the Macroeconomic Policy Division, Fiscal Policy Office, Ministry of Finance, will be the MC for the interview in this 1 hour with you today. โดยในวันนี้รายการ Local Reach เอื้อมลึกถึงภูมิภาคก็ได้รับเกียรติเป็นอย่างสูงจากเจ้าที่จาก Department of the Treasury รัฐบาลเครือรัฐออสเตรเลียทั้งที่ประจำอยู่ณสถานทูตออสเตรเลียประจำกรุงแคนเบราครับที่สถานทูตออสเตรเลียประจำกรุงจาการ์ตาประเทศอินโดนีเซียและก็ที่ประจำอยู่ณกรุงแคนเบราคือรัฐออสเตรเลียโดยท่านจะมาถ่ายทอดเรื่องราวภายใต้แนวคิดความร่วมมือระหว่างรัฐบาลกลางและภูมิภาคเพื่อสร้าง Inclusive Growth ในรายการของเราวันนี้ครับและขณะนี้แขกรับเชิญก็ได้เข้ามาอยู่ในออนไลน์มีตติ้งรูมของเราเรียบร้อยแล้วครับ Today, our interview program, it is a great honor to welcome the official from Department of the Treasury, Australian government, who are having a mission at the Australian Embassy in Jakarta, Indonesia, and who are currently working in Canberra, Australia. Interestingly, they would love to share the topic of a lesson learned from Australia, central government and provincial cooperation for inclusive growth. And now the honorable guests have joined in our meeting room already. Officially, hello, Ms. Denson. Hi from Thailand. And other colleagues from staying in Canberra now. Thank you endlessly for joining us today. Hey, can you hear me? Okay. You didn't. Okay.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the welcome to today, Chaiwa. It's great to be here.
Yes. Because the Dr. Bisic has an emergency issue now. We will skip to the interview part. So are you ready for the presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chaiwa. And maybe to begin, I'll just provide a bit of context on the Australian Treasury. So as Chaiwa mentioned, I'm Hannah Denson, the Senior Economist for the Australian Treasury in Southeast Asia. And the Australian Treasury has a similar role in government to the Ministry of Finance in Thailand. But I understand that there's some functions that differ a little bit. So the Australian Treasury also takes on some roles that the National Development Agency in Thailand does, including around policy ranging from markets to tax. And then, of course, the topic of today, the relations between the central government and provinces. And so, as Chaiwat mentioned, Treasury has a presence in Southeast Asia. So we're based in Jakarta, but look to build relationships across the region and look for opportunities for policy cooperation like today, as well as understanding the latest macro developments. So it's very exciting to be here today. Unfortunately, our Treasury representative for the region, Mr. Cosimo Thorley, isn't able to make it today as he is unwell, so he sends his apologies. And today we're very excited to talk about fiscal tools to support inclusive development. And we're particularly looking at the relationship between the central government and the provinces. And this was a topic that arose in our discussions when we met Chaiwat and the broader macroeconomic team as part of one of our regional visits, where we came to Thailand to meet with economic officials and hear what's happening on the ground. So today I'll talk through the Australian approach to central government and provincial fiscal relations. But I'd just like to acknowledge that this is just one approach, which is no doubt influenced by Australia's geography, history, But we hope that the talking through the Australian approach might highlight some policy questions and considerations. I can also share some history which might give you a sense of some of the lessons we've learned along the way. So that's a bit of an introduction about Treasury in Southeast Asia. And before I start sharing my slides and start the presentation, I'd just like to emphasize that please let me know if you can't understand. I understand that it's always more difficult listening in another language, so don't hesitate to put up your hand and ask me to slow down or speak more clearly, or if you miss something, I'm happy to repeat as well. And I understand that Chai Wat will also do some quick summaries in Thai every couple of slides, so hopefully that will be an opportunity to catch up as well. So with that context, I'll now share my slides and we can start the presentation.
Yeah, please. Can you make it? Okay, yeah.
Fantastic. So hopefully you can all see this first slide. And so I'll start with the overview. Can everyone see that slide has changed? Okay.
Just a moment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think we can see it now, right? You may start. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, and please let me know if there are any issues along the way. I'm also more than happy to take any questions if we go, if something needs a clearer explanation. Although conscious that while I've worked in areas, for example, tax, that touch on the relationship between the central government and the provinces, I've also got my colleagues from Canberra who'll be joining, who might be able to help with any more technical questions at the end. So today, to talk through the central government and provincial relations, I'll start by providing some context on the current Australian system before talking through some of the example agreements between the central government and the provinces, or the states as we call them. And then I'll finish up by talking about some of the key frameworks that govern those agreements. And then along the way, I'll provide some key historical developments that might highlight some other recent changes and policy considerations. So first of all, the Australian context. So Australia is a federation made up of 8 different states and the Commonwealth government. And so the states are broadly equivalent. They're regions within our country, similar to provinces in Thailand, I understand. And I've also simplified the language a little bit. We actually have states and territories, which are regions that have slightly different legal roles in Australia. But for the purpose of this presentation, I'll just refer to them as the states. And to keep things simple, rather than referring to the Commonwealth government, which I know can also mean other things globally, I'll talk about the central government. And one of the key documents that sets out the relationship between the central government and the states is the Australian Constitution, which splits responsibilities. Under the Constitution, the central government collects most of the tax revenue. So it's allocated different powers around what it can collect. And then the states are responsible for a large share of expenditure. For example, delivering services like spending on health and education. So what this means is that there's a high degree of vertical fiscal imbalance, which is a term used to describe when one part of the government receives more revenue, but another part is responsible for a larger proportion of spending, like we have in Australia. So what does this look like in the numbers? Sorry, one moment. There we go. Hopefully you can see this chart which shows that state expenses are greater than revenue. On the left-hand side, we have the state expenditure, including education and health, which are some of the key spending items, like I've mentioned. And then on the right-hand side, we have different sources of revenue for the states. And you can see that there's a large imbalance between the two. And at this point, I'll just caveat that these numbers are illustrative. They haven't been updated for the latest budget estimates, but they show clearly the question of how do states balance their budget. So the answer is through the central government transfers to the states. So we can see in green here the value of the central government transfers on the right-hand side. And we can see that the central government transfers make up a large portion of money that is available to the states to spend. That means that's where we're going to focus the presentation on that transfer, because that defines the relationship between the central government and the states. So maybe, Chaiwat, that's a good point now if you wanted to do a quick.
Yeah, sure. Okay, can you freeze this slide for us, please? Okay. I may summarize in Thai now. ก็อย่างที่คุณฮันน่าได้กล่าวไปนะฮะสำหรับในส่วนของภาพรวมเนี่ยในส่วนของภาพรวมของทางเรื่องการคลังท้องถิ่นที่เกิดขึ้นในออสเตรเลียก็ยังเป็นที่ทราบกันดีครับว่าที่ออสเตรเลียเนี่ยก็จะมีรัฐบาลกลางนะฮะซึ่งทำหน้าที่ดูแลในเรื่องของการจัดเก็บรายได้ แล้วก็การจัดสรรรายจ่ายให้กับรัฐบาลท้องถิ่นที่เขาเรียกว่าเครือรัฐเนี่ยฮะที่อยู่มีทั้งหมด8เครือรัฐนะครับทีนี้ฮะเราเห็นได้จากภาพที่ชัดเจนคือความสัมพันธ์ของระหว่างรัฐบาลกลางกับเครือรัฐต่างๆเนี่ยจะพบว่ารายจ่ายของเครือรัฐเนี่ยค่อนข้างเยอะมากนะฮะเราจะเห็นได้จากกราฟสีออกแนวสีฟ้าด้านซ้ายมือของท่านนะฮะในขณะที่รายได้ของเครือรัฐเนี่ยมีน้อยมากจนเกิดคำว่า vertical fiscal imbalance หรือ VFI ที่ทางคุณฮันน่าได้กล่าวไปนะฮะซึ่งตรงนี้แหละฮะก็เป็นส่วนสำคัญที่รัฐบาลกลางในเข้ามามีบทบาทเกี่ยวโยงอย่างแนบแน่นกับรัฐบาลเครือรัฐต่างๆก็คือในส่วนที่จะต้องอุดหนุนส่วนต่างที่เกิดขึ้นซึ่งเราจะเห็นได้ว่าก็คือตัวสีเขียวๆที่อยู่ทางกราฟแท่งด้านขวาฮะคือตัว Central Government Transfer ตัวนี้นั่นเองฮะและนี่นะคือความสัมพันธ์ที่ทางรัฐบาลกลางแล้วก็ในส่วนของเครือรัฐต่างๆเกี่ยวโยงกันในภาคของด้านการคลังครับผมไม่แน่ใจเดี๋ยวgive me a moment you can start the second section please thank you
Thanks very much, Chaiwat. So now I'll dive into this green section around the central government transfers to the states. So on this next slide, I go through the different types of payments to the states. And broadly, there are two broad categories. The first is untied payments, which is money that the Commonwealth transfers, that the states can decide what they spend it on. And then the second type is specific purpose payments. And for these payments, there are conditions around how that money can be used. So this chart here shows the rough value of each of these different types of payments. And on the left-hand side in blue, the GST and other general revenue assistance, which makes up about half of total spending, are those untied payments. And then on the right-hand side in the different colours, we have different examples of specific purpose payments. For example, health and school funding, like I've mentioned before. So broadly, about half are untied and half are specific purpose payments. So at this point, most of the rest of the discussion will focus on the specific purpose payments because that's where a lot of the work and administration goes towards. But I thought it might be useful to provide a brief history on the untied payments, and in particular how they relate.
Hannah, sorry, excuse me.
Yeah.
Because Dr. Pisit is now with us now. Can you give him a little bit of time to give an opening remark? Sorry for the interrupt. Dr. Pisit,
No worries, that's fine.
are you here with me?
Yes.
Okay, you may. Can you give just a opening remark for us, please? Sorry. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you. Good morning, Ms Hannah Denson. So it's very good to meet you and your colleague from Australian government team. So my name is Pisit Popang. I'm the director of the macroeconomic policy division. So we are delighted today to have the official from the Australian Treasury joining the local reach interview today. And we have in our virtual meeting rooms the government official at the Ministry of Finance listening to the Australian fiscal policy experience. So I think I would like to introduce to our team that we are quite delighted to have this opportunity to learn from our Australian counterpart. So our office, we are responsible for the fiscal policy formulation at the Ministry of Finance, and also my team are interested in monitoring we are responsible for monitoring the Thai economy on the micro and the macro level. So I think it's quite useful to learn from the Australian experience. And I think one of the major policy effort for the Thai government going forward is the decentralization, which Thailand, we are trying to push for the fiscal decentralization. So I think we can learn from Australia, which is one of the excellent country example on how fiscal policy can support the collaboration between the central government and the local government. So I think we would like to learn from your experience. So I think I'm quite confident that today's interview will be quite beneficial to my colleague at the Ministry of Finance in Thailand as the policy formulator, so that we can learn from your expertise in the Australia. So I would like to hope that this interview, the lesson learned from Australia, central government and provincial cooperation for inclusive growth, will be quite beneficial for all of us in Thailand. And in the future, if you come to Thailand, please come to visit our office. We would be gladly to meet you. And we have many good Thai restaurants nearby in our office to accommodate you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pisit. It's a pleasure to be here and to join you in cooperating between the Australian and Thai policy cooperation. And yeah, we look forward to continuing that cooperation through continued visits like the one we did earlier this year. And we'll never say no to eating some delicious Thai food. I'm always disappointed that, well, not disappointed, but as exciting as economic meetings are, it would always be lovely to experience more of the country during these visits, and often food is one of the ways that I try and get some of that broader culture in on the brief work meeting visits. So I look forward to continuing those discussions in the future, and it's great to be here today. Maybe at this point I'll continue on through this second topic. Sorry, I can't hear you, Chaiwat, but I think that was used.
Sorry, we mute the microphone. Sorry, can you just go back to the presentation? Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Pisit, again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chaiwat, and thank you, Dr. Pisit. So this slide here goes into detail on some of the untied payments. So this was half of the payments from the Commonwealth to the states that were on the previous slide. And these payments originate from 2000, when Australia introduced the Goods and Services Tax, which is based on the value-added tax or the VAT model. And so this was part of a package of reform, which also eliminated some other taxes like a national sales tax and some smaller, less efficient state taxes. But what's the key impact of this change for central government state relationships was that the GST tax is raised by the central government, but it's automatically transferred to the states. So what this means is that there's one tax that's still nationally consistent, that each state pays the same tax rate, but at the same time, the tax provides a stable source of revenue for the states, and there's reduced reliance on grants from the central government, which means that the states have more flexibility to respond to the desires and needs of people in their state. So that provides some context on that half of the transfers from the central government to the states. One other feature to be aware of is around how is money allocated between states. So Australia's 8 states have many natural differences. So for example, geography, some of the states in the north have lots of land, which can raise the cost of delivering services. And demographics, in the southeast, we have some of our big cities like Sydney and Melbourne, which have large populations. And these differences affect their fiscal capacity to deliver services. So what the central government seeks to do is to equalise the state's fiscal resources so that no matter where Australians live, they can all access a similar level of government services. And this is done through the process of horizontal fiscal equalisation, where the central government equalises the fiscal resources across each of the states through some of these transfers. So that's another feature to be aware of in the system. And maybe try what that's...
Yes, I think, yeah, that's quite too much now. Can you go back to slide 7, please, Hannah? Thank you. โอเคครับก็เดี๋ยวขออนุญาตอธิบายขยายความในสิ่งที่คุณฮันน่าได้กล่าวให้เราฟังนะครับเหมือนกับประเทศไทยฮะณตอนนี้คือในส่วนของการรายจ่ายของภาครัฐเนี่ยที่ในส่วนของที่เกี่ยวข้องกับองค์กรปกครองส่วนท้องถิ่นในออสเตรเลียเนี่ยก็จะมีความคล้ายคลึงกับของไทยก็คือจะมี payment ที่แบ่งเป็น2อย่างคือ1ที่เรียกว่า United ซึ่งบ้านเราจะเรียกว่าเงินอุดหนุนทั่วไปนะฮะและ2เนี่ยก็คือตัว specific purpose หรือที่อาจจะเรียกว่าเงินอุดหนุนเฉพาะกิจในภาษาไทยบ้านเราโดยส่วนใหญ่ในส่วนของเงินที่ Central Government นะฮะจ่ายลงไปให้กับทาง State หรือรัฐต่างๆเนี่ยก็หลักๆเนี่ยมาจากตัว GST ซึ่ง GST ที่คุณอันน่าได้ขยายความก็คือตัว Goods and Service Taxes มีลักษณะคล้ายๆกับตัว VAT บ้านเราเนี่ยแหละฮะโดย GST เนี่ยถูก introduce ขึ้นในปี 2000 เป็นรายได้หลักเลยนะฮะที่ทางรัฐบาลกลางเนี่ยใช้ในการอุดหนุนภารกิจต่างๆให้กับ State Hannah could you go to the next slide please Thank you แล้วก็ในส่วนของประวัติของ GST เนี่ยฮะก็อย่างที่ผมได้นำเรียนทุกท่านไปฮะก็เริ่มขึ้นในปี 2000 นะฮะโดยชื่อเต็มก็คือ Goods and Services Tax โดยที่ไอเดียเนี่ยก็คล้ายๆกับตัว Value Added Tax หรือ VAT ที่บ้านเราใช้ฮะโดยตัว GST เนี่ยมีขึ้นเพื่ออะไรฮะเป็นวัตถุประสงค์หลักของ GST ที่ทาง Central Government Australia เนี่ยใช้ก็คือเป็นการลดนะฮะรายจ่ายเงินอุดหนุนต่างๆที่รัฐแต่ละรัฐเนี่ยต้องพึ่งพาจากทางรัฐบาลกลางและตัวนี้ฮะได้เป็นตัวที่ถูกโอนอัตโนมัติให้กับรัฐต่างๆนะฮะexcuse me can you go back to the next slide please sorry yeah next slide thank you แล้วก็ตัวนี้ฮะในการจัดสรรตัว GST เนี่ยฮะก็จะมีความเกี่ยวข้องนะฮะรวมถึงตัวเงินอุดหนุนอื่นๆด้วยเพราะว่าตัวเงินอุดหนุนที่รัฐบาลกลางเนี่ยฮะจ่ายให้กับทางรัฐเนี่ยห กเลยเนี่ยจะพบว่าออสเตรเลียเป็นประเทศที่มีขนาดใหญ่มากนะฮะแล้วก็จะมีลักษณะทางธรรมชาติที่แตกต่างกันรวมถึงลักษณะทางภูมิศาสตร์ลักษณะทางประชากรที่แตกต่างกันเพราะฉะนั้นรัฐบาลกลางนะฮะจะพยายามที่จะเพิ่มศักยภาพในการที่จะเรียกว่าไงดีฮะรัฐบาลท้องถิ่นต่างๆให้มีความเท่าเทียมกันเพราะฉะนั้นบทบาทของรัฐบาลกลางคือเขาใช้เครื่องมือที่เรียกว่า horizontal fiscal equalization หรือ HFE นะฮะเป็นตัวที่จะใช้ในการสร้างความลดความเหลื่อมล้ำของแต่ละพื้นที่นะฮะนี่ก็คือเป็นเครื่องมือที่มีชื่อเสียงออสเตรเลียเครื่องมือหนึ่งหรือที่เรียกว่า HFE นะฮะ Yes Hannah you may proceed your presentation thank you
Thanks very much, Chaiwat. So now on to the next section. We've talked through the context of Australia. So now I'll talk about some of the agreements between the central government and the states. The 1901 Australian Constitution sets out some rules that govern this relationship, including a section that allows grants from the central government of funding to the states. And there are a couple of types of agreements that govern this relationship. There are some overarching agreements that outline the governance, and then there's also agreements for specific sectors or projects. And each of these is agreed by the central government and the 8 states. So that gives you a broad idea of the agreements between the different governments. So what are some specific examples of agreements? Well, the health is a big part of state spending, as you've seen, and the National Health Reform Agreement finances central government support for public hospitals. It's the largest single agreement. So in financial year 2022-23, it was forecast to cost to transfer to the states $28 billion, including some COVID health response. So it's a big part of the way that the central government supports service delivery by the states. For this agreement, the central government pays in advance based on estimates around what they expect the activity or the amount of health services to be, and then payment at the end of each financial year after the health services have been delivered and we know what the actual activity is, payments are then reconciled. So if it's a bit over or a bit under, that's adjusted. And some independent bodies manage this process. The Administrator of National Health Funding Pool and the National Health Funding Body. And price is also an important part of the funding process. So there's the National Efficient Price. And again, here there's an independent body to manage that, the Health and Aged Care Pricing Authority. So that's one example of how the central government supports ongoing service delivery by the states. And now I'll move to a second example, which looks at how the central government supports capital expenditure by the states. So the Land Transport Infrastructure Project delivers infrastructure like roads. And one feature of the way this funding is dispersed is that it's set out, planned spending for each year is planned across months and across different elements through schedules or almost spreadsheets that set out how much money will be going where. And these are agreed by the governments through accounts twice a year. So Australia has a budget in May as well as a mid-year economic and fiscal outlook. And these two accounts also provide an opportunity to monitor and update the schedules, so they provide some flexibility. Accountability for this agreement, there's a few ways that is supported. One is that payment happens after key milestones rather than before, as for the services example. And another one is that there's audits and inspections, And for some projects, there's public tender requirements. So that means that companies are able to bid and compete against each other to provide the work, and the best bid wins. So that finishes up the second section on some examples of agreements. Over to you, Chaiwat.
Yes, I can go back to a couple of slides previously, please. Thank you. ในส่วนของlet me summarize in Thai for your second section เนี่ยสำหรับ section ที่2นะก็ทางคุณฮันน่าก็ได้เล่าในส่วนของภาพรวมนะในส่วนการจัดสรรงบประมาณเพื่ออุดหนุนให้กับรัฐต่างๆเนี่ยทีเนี้ย Can you go back to the next slide please หลักๆเลยฮะรายจ่ายที่ทางรัฐบาลกลางนะฮะอุดหนุนเนี่ยก็จะเป็นมีเรื่องของพวกค่าพวกรายจ่ายสาธารณสุขหรือว่าเป็นรายจ่ายในส่วนของโครงสร้างพื้นฐานต่างๆซึ่งตรงนี้ฮะอย่างสาธารณสุขเนี่ยก็เป็นรายจ่ายที่มีสัดส่วนมากพอสมควรในช่วงที่เกิดการแพร่ระบาดโควิด -19 ที่ผ่านมานะฮะนอกจากนี้ทางรัฐบาลกลางเนี่ยก็ต้องดูแลรายจ่ายในส่วนตรงนี้เป็นภาระพอสมควรที่จะต้องจัดสรรไปให้กับทางรัฐบาลท้องถิ่นนะฮะหรือว่า state government ถ้าเมื่อกี้นี้ฮะมีหลังไมค์แก้ไขมาในส่วนของpayment นะฮะก็จะมีสองหลักคืออันหนึ่งอ่านว่า unnight นะฮะผมขอโทษนะฮะไม่ใช่ united นะ unnight กับ specific purpose Okay, Hannah, you may start with your first section. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So now to finish up, the third section is around some different frameworks. And so I'll start with the decision-making framework between the governments. So across the central government and the states, Australia has a cabinet system where different ministers are responsible for different areas of government. And they come together to make agreements. And in the system, the treasurer is a bit like the Thai finance minister. So an important body for the agreements between the states and the central governments is made up of the treasurers from all of those governments, which form the Council on Federal Financial Relations, or KIFA. Through this body, this council, agreements all the governments come together to make agreements, and specific agreements can either be led by the treasurer as the equivalent of the finance minister, or some agreements are led by other ministers. So for example, with health and education, the health and education ministers play an important role. And then within the KIFA policy process, there's different stages. So an agreement can be initiated, and then there's a negotiation, and then evaluation and renewal. So there's a established practice set up for making decisions and bringing together all the governments to make these agreements. A second important framework is around accountability. So the Council of Treasurers that I've mentioned, KIFA, they play an important role with providing oversight, and the structuring of reporting and payments also helps provide accountability. So for large service delivery agreements, like the health example I mentioned earlier, that's one example. There are often ongoing payments to support the service delivery, and payments are made before the service is delivered and then reconciled at the end of the year against what actually happened. Performance reporting is used to assess how the services are delivered against goals. For individual projects or programs, payments are made after states have achieved milestones, except for some capital projects where there are startup payments. And evidence of achievement is required, whether that's reports or certificates of completion. And so to go into some detail on what that reporting looks like, the report on government services is a flagship report, and that comes out twice. There's work done twice yearly, produced by the Independent Productivity Commission, which is an independent agency in Australia to do detailed research and economic advice. And as well as the report format, there's now also dashboards which track how key indicators are progressing over time. So that finishes up the third and final section.
Yes, thank you. Can you go back to
To translate.
slide? Yeah, that one. Thank you very much. ในส่วนของพาร์ท3ที่ทางคุณฮันน่านำเสนอมาก็จะเป็นการนำเสนอในส่วนของภาพรวมกรอบการตัดสินใจในการจัดสรรงบประมาณต่างๆนะฮะซึ่งทีนี้เขาจะมีคณะกรรมการขึ้นมาคณะหนึ่งฮะที่เรียกว่า Council on Federal Financial Relations ทีนี้ฮะตัวคณะกรรมการโครงสร้างเนี่ยฮะก็เกิดขึ้นจากรัฐมนตรีกระทรวงคลังของแต่ละรัฐนะฮะที่เกี่ยวข้องแล้วก็รัฐมนตรีกระทรวงคลังของรัฐบาลกลางเนี่ยมาตัดสินใจร่วมกัน โดยจะเป็นข้อตกลงที่เกิดจากรัฐมนตรีกระทรวงคลังแล้วก็รัฐมนตรีอื่นๆที่อยู่ในแต่ละรัฐนั้นนะฮะมาดูว่าควรจะต้องจัดสรรงบประมาณด้านไหนยอะน้อยอย่างไรฮะ Can you go back to next slide Can you go to next slide please Thank you แล้วก็ในส่วนของตัว CFFR นะฮะที่ผมได้นำเสนอไปก่อนหน้าเนี่ยที่ทางคุณธนาได้พูดมาเนี่ยก็คือหลักๆเลยจะขึ้นมาตัดสินใจเกี่ยวกับในส่วนของการให้บริการต่างๆที่ต้องให้แก่ประชาชนซึ่งถ้าเป็นโครงการขนาดใหญ่เนี่ยก็จะเรียกว่าเป็น national agreement นะฮะก็เป็นโครงการที่เกี่ยวข้องกับรายจ่ายข้ามปีงบประมาณรวมถึงรายจ่ายที่มีการตัดสินใจก่อนที่จะมีการอนุมัตินะฮะก่อนสิ้นปีงบประมาณอะไรเงี้ยแล้วก็ในส่วนของที่เป็นโครงการเล็กๆโครงการ individual project เนี่ยเขาจะมีอีกข้อตกลงหนึ่งฮะที่ชื่อว่า Federation Funding Agreement ฮะซึ่งตัวรายจ่ายเนี่ยฮะหรือโครงการนี้จะเป็นรายจ่ายที่เกิดขึ้นหลังจากมีการที่แต่ละรัฐเนี่ยได้มีการบรรลุวัตถุประสงค์ในโครงการต่างๆแล้วโอเค Can you go to next slide please Hannah Thank you ทีนี้ในส่วนของโครงการต่างๆเนี่ยฮะที่ได้มีการอนุมัติงบประมาณแล้วเนี่ยทางรัฐบาลออสเตรเลียเนี่ยก็จะมีการทำรีพอร์ตที่เกี่ยวข้องกับการให้บริการต่างๆด้วยฮะซึ่งจะมีการรายงานเนี่ย2 ครั้งต่อ1 ปีนะฮะโดยจะเป็นการรายงานโดยคณะกรรมการที่เรียกชื่อว่า Independent Productivity Commission ฮะซึ่งนอกจากมีการทำรีพอร์ตรายงานแล้วฮะก็จะมีการนำเสนอในรูปแบบแดชบอร์ดด้วยนะฮะนี่คือความน่าสนใจที่ทางออสเตรเลียได้มีซึ่งทีนี้คุณชนัทนะได้บอกผมว่าทางของไทยก็มีเหมือนกันแต่ว่าเราจะมีการรายงาน1 ครั้งต่อปีHannah, Mr. Thanat, my colleague just tell me we do have that one reporting in Thailand as well, but we report only once a year. That interestingly, that Australian can do twice a year. Thank you. Can you proceed your presentation, please?
Yeah, well, that finishes up the presentation for today.
I think we finally reached the end of today's interview, and now I may invite Dr. Norapat Asawanlop, Finance and Fiscal Journal Editor, to give a closing remark. Over to you, Dr. Norapat, please, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon, distinguished guests. This local reach interview project is a collaboration between the Macroeconomic Policy Division, the FPO Knowledge Management Team, and the Fiscal and Finance Journal. We collaborate on this initiative because we want to share fresh information in macro and regional economics with the FPO workers and journal readers. In addition to the live interview, we produce the interview summary as an infographic poster for FPO social media and publish the interview piece in our journal. I really glad to have all of the colleagues from Commonwealth-state Relations Division in Canberra here today. I find it really fruitful and think we can learn a lot from your experience because I found there are many aspects that the Thai fiscal policy is quite similar to those of the Australians, and we can apply to our work. On top of that, I see it as a huge opportunity since we have direct professionals from overseas joining us for the very first time. On behalf of the Division of Macroeconomic Policy, the FPO-KM team, and the Fiscal and Finance Journal, I would like to thank all colleagues from the Australia Treasury for providing us with this wonderful opportunity. Soon after, our staff would prepare all the information from today's interview and publish it on our division's Facebook fan page called Macro เศรษฐกิจชิวๆ as well as the Fiscal and Finance Journal's fan page, YouTube, and website. Lastly, I strongly believe that our audience, particularly FPO colleagues, will learn some ideas and information that may be used to design fiscal policy with the sustainable economic aim as a vision from today's interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Narapat, and our team are saying that today's interview is extremely impressive. I hope all of you may gain knowledge and new idea about decentralization policy. Last but not least, thank you, Hannah, for make today happen, and colleagues from Canberra as well. On behalf of the team, I really appreciate your time and dedication for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Chaiwat, and also for all your work in bringing this together today. I'd also like to thank my colleagues in Canberra and finish by saying look forward to more policy cooperation between Thailand and Australia. Thanks
Yeah,
today.
thank you. We do think it's our beginning of our cooperation as well. After operation, I think, yeah, cooperation. Thank you. And to the audience, please do consider subscribing in our all communication channels, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Blogdit, as Dr. Narapat said. And สุดท้ายนี้ขอบคุณผู้เข้าแขกผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านนะขอบคุณครับสวัสดีครับ